The Kyber Crystal is the heart of a Jedi's lightsaber, and because of the way they gain their color, it is also the heart of that Jedi themself. These mysterious crystals are actually living beings and are able to sing out to Force users, selecting them as worthy to hold the crystal. Once that Force user answers the call and harvests that Kyber Crystal from its resting place, they immediately imbue it with their emotion, mental state, and personality traits, which tints it a certain color. If you happen to be in a state of deep connection with the cosmic force like Qui-Gon Jinn, your crystal will turn green. But if you're more aggressive but still follow the will of the living force, it may turn blue. But there is more to a crystal than just its color, and there are actually classes of lightsaber crystal which give the resulting saber very unique and special effects. So let's break down the meaning of every single Kyber Crystal in Canon and what traits they give a fully constructed saber. Remember to hit that subscribe button and let's get into it. Number 1. The BARAB ingot crystals. BARAB ingots were a very unique and dangerous type of lightsaber crystal which were found on the heavily irradiated planet of BARAB 1. They were usually found in clusters deep inside of the planet's mountain ranges and were physically hot to the touch when harvested. Because the planet that they resided on was a radioactive wasteland, the crystals were highly radioactive and also gave off a faint green glow. When placed inside of a lightsaber, they created a very powerful fiery blade, and it even turned the whole saber radioactive. Number 2. Seeker crystals. Seeker crystals were a variety of kyber which when used created a pink blade. It also allowed its user to detect nearby living beings regardless of if they were force sensitive or not. It did this by attuning to its user through the force and acted as their sixth sense, being able to detect danger and hidden beings in a large radius around them. The origins of these crystals are shrouded in mystery, but dark rumors began to spread that said they came from the outside edges of the galaxy, from beings much more powerful than anyone had witnessed before. Number 3. Kimber stones. Kimber stones were found on the moon Yanes, and honestly, they were pretty bad. When placed inside of a saber, they produced a pathetically weak, non-lethal blade. Because of this, the Jedi refused to use them for many years, but over time they soon realized that as peacekeepers, a non-lethal saber variant actually does align with their values. Number 4. The Solari crystal. Solari crystals were an exceptionally rare type of kyber which formed an unusually wide blade that was great for blocking blaster bolts. These crystals were so rare that they were thought to be myths by the time of the Empire, and because of this, light side force users in hiding gathered them and made sure to protect them from evil powers. Another really cool feature of this blade is that its width was directly linked to the user's inner turmoil. So if the user became conflicted or deeply worried, the blade would become thinner and harder to block blaster bolts with. Number 5. CHRISTOPHSIS crystals. These crystals were a very common type of lightsaber crystal found on, you guessed it, CHRISTOPHSIS. The planet was a major location in the early days of the Clone Wars, and although it was strategically important to the Republic, it was even more important to the Jedi Order because of its kyber deposits. The blade created by the CHRISTOPHSIS crystals actually amplified any kinetic energy imparted into the blade when it was swung. In other words, it made every swing of the blade much faster and stronger even if the user was relatively weak. Number 6. Nishalarite stones. Nishalarite stones were a class of kyber crystal found on planets which had very strong magnetic fields. They were usually dark grey or dark blue in colour and produced thick, dense blades. Interestingly though, they also intensified when pointed towards the magnetic north of whatever planet they were on. Number 7. GHOSTFIRE crystals. Now these ones are actually some of the coolest in the galaxy. When found inside of their rocky outcroppings on remote worlds, GHOSTFIRE kyber is entirely transparent and can even be bumped into if you're not careful. They usually only grow on soaring mountain peaks, but could also be found in deep abysses. The reason this crystal was so dangerous is because when used to create a saber, the blade produced was dim and translucent along with producing absolutely no sound or hum. This made it almost impossible for an opponent to detect its location in the middle of a fight. On top of all of this, when the saber was swung, it would produce a delayed after image of the person swinging the blade and the blade itself. This caused opponents to become severely disoriented and even sometimes fall onto the blade. Because the crystals could only be found on the mountain peaks of the most remote worlds in the galaxy, these crystals were only found every few decades. Number 8. Dragite gems. Dragite gems are very small, dull and brittle kyber crystals which could be found in the Dulop mountain ranges of the planet Mihali. Because they were pretty much the most brittle and weak kyber crystals ever discovered, they were very hard to work into the center of a lightsaber, even for the most careful of Jedi. Once a Dragite gem actually made it inside of the saber however, the blade emitted a loud hum and produced a devastating shockwave every time it struck a solid target. This was perfect for disorienting or badly hurting an opponent without directly killing them. Number 9. THONTIN crystals. These crystals were rarely ever used in the construction of lightsabers and were instead allocated to Jedi healers for use in their rituals. The THONTIN crystals had deep healing properties which Jedi healers could tap into to ease the pain of their patients. When it was used inside of a saber though, it allowed its wielder to battle through immense pain and continue the fight. When the healers found out that it was being used to harm and as a weapon, they were furious. Number 10. LORRDIAN gemstones. This type of Kyber was created by the Force-sensitive LORRDIANs, which you may remember from Rogue One and the Star Wars Eclipse trailer during the time of the Khan's disorders. The Khan's disorder was a time of great struggle for the LORRDIAN people, which led them to create these crystals. Now, the really cool part about these sabers is that when used in combat, they allowed the user to predict their opponent's actions even further than typical Jedi foresight. Number 11. Tainted NIGHTSUSTER Crystal. This crystal is really intriguing because it was created by the Nightsisters of Dathomir, who use a variant of the dark side of the Force known as dark magics. To create these tainted crystals, they took regular Illum crystals and soaked them in the magical ichor that seeped through Dathomir. This distorted their connection to the Force badly. A blade created from this crystal would then emit a putrid, choking green smoke when used. This is what powers Mother Talzin's sword. Number 12. The KRAYT Dragon Pearl. Now, you might remember this one from The Mandalorian Season 2, and if so, you'll know that they are found deep inside of the belly of a KRAYT dragon. Though you certainly weren't guaranteed a pearl every time you took down one of these tremendous creatures, they were exceedingly rare. The pearls managed to get into the beasts because over their lifetime they eat hundreds of rocks from around the deserts. On very rare occasions, these rocks have kyber inside of them and therefore can't dissolve, forming them into huge round pearls. When placed into a hilt, KRAYT dragon pearls produce a blade that howls with the same sound as a KRAYT dragon scream on every swing. They were also extremely destructive, with some believing that they can even cut through Beskar metal. If that ends up being true, I bet we'll see that in The Mandalorian Season 3. Number 13. Dantari Crystals. Dantari crystals were a class of crystals found exclusively on the planet Dantooine in the Outer Rim. These crystals used to be extremely popular among Jedi when there used to be a temple located on Dantooine, but later on they declined in usage significantly. Dantari Kyber was usually found in the center of eggs of Kinrath. Kinrath are the horrifying arachnid species who are native to Kashyyyk, and the Bad Batch actually encountered them in an unfinished episode of the Clone Wars. It is currently unknown how exactly these crystals get into the eggs of the Kinrath or if they form there naturally in canon. We also have no idea what type of blade they produce in canon, but in Legends it channeled the user's force power back into them, helping them to recover in battle. Number 14. Illum-Class Crystals. This class covers all of the crystals that can be found and harvested from the planet Illum. They were located deep within the cold caves of the snowy planet and were considered by the Jedi to be the best type of kyber to use in your lightsaber for most cases. The two known subclasses of Illum crystals in canon are Mephite and Pontite kyber. The Illum version of the Mephite crystals are exactly the same as all others, and the Pontite crystals are much more rare but slightly more powerful. As a result, this type of kyber was not only used for lightsaber construction, but also in galactic communications. And that extra power is also why Illum-class Pontite crystals were chosen for use by Galen Erso in creating the Death Star. Number 15. JEDHA Crystals. After that, we have a type of kyber from the planet JEDHA called JEDHA Crystals. This class of kyber was treasured by the Jedi Order because of its beauty and because it produces extremely potent and very focused blades. This was flipped on its head, however, after the Death Star fired on Jedha in Rogue One, cracking most of the crystals below the surface. These new cracked JEDHA crystals then produced horribly unstable, ragged and violent blades. Number 16. The ADEGAN class Kyber Crystals. ADEGAN class Kyber Crystals were only lightly force reactive and could only be infused with a small amount of a force user's power. As the name suggests, they can primarily be found in the ADEGA system in the Outer Rim and only have one subtype in canon. That subtype is the Mephite crystal. Mephite crystals were very rare, lustrous kyber crystals which sparkle and shine very lightly under light. These ones were very well suited to being put inside of lightsabers because of their internal light structure and light modulation capabilities. The one downside of these crystals is that once infused with the Force, they gave off a very small but constant Force signature that could be sensed by any Force user nearby. Number 17. Obsidian. Obsidian was a material found primarily on the planets Mustafar and Obadiah, but also in other remote locations like Arc-2. Now, kyber crystals which were formed from obsidian actually have an inherent infusion of the dark side, making them the only crystals to produce a naturally red blade. Usually the color of the blade is determined by the user's force affinity at the time the kyber crystal was harvested, but with obsidian, its inherent dark side pull overrides that and turns the blade red. Not to mention, to get red usually you'd have to bleed another crystal to turn it red. Snoke also had a ring with an obsidian kyber crystal on it, but we currently have no idea what he used it for. Number 18. Sorian Crystals. Sorian crystals were found deep in catacombs and they reflected light in a way that looked similar to dancing fire. The lightsaber blade created from Sorian crystals would release a huge surge of fiery power every time it contacted something. Very useful for tunneling or just straight up destroying many enemies at once. Number 19. Synthetic Kyber. In canon, synthetic kyber crystals have a much different meaning and story than in Legends. In Legends, the Sith almost exclusively used synthetic kyber for their blades, but in canon they were used by both sides. Unfortunately, they were extremely unstable and even explosive, so the Empire made it illegal to possess them, and the Jedi just got rid of them. Number 20. VARPELINE Crystals. VARPELINE crystals were found mostly on the planet Miaralis 2 and were so dense that they were primarily used for industrial cutting machines. When they were used in a blade, however, they emitted a very sharp hum and screech when contacting other objects and had a much easier time cutting through metals. Number 21, we have the ZOPHIS crystal. This crystal comes from the planet Zoph, and it used to be a popular type of Kyber long before the Clone Wars. It fell out of popularity though because it produced a devastating and unstable blade due to the crystal's unique resonance. They also suffered from extreme vulnerability to fluctuations in power, meaning any small dip would turn the blade off. Obviously, this was not safe for the user. So that is every single type of Kyber crystal in Canon. Really hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. If you made it this far, check out my video on every single Jedi survivor.